Hi, this is Bob Shear, Robert Shear, with another edition of what is it, the Bob and Ray Show, or Two Old Coots from the Bronx, uh, or Tuesday with Ray. I don't know what it is, but it's an interesting conversation with two guys who did start out. We're both in our 80s here, and we started out in the Bronx. He grew up in an Irish neighborhood. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood. Never the two would meet unless in an adversarial, hostile way, unless it was the postman or the cop or something. Then you could talk. But he went to Fordham, the Jesuit school. I went to City College, and then he went into the military. Went to the volunteer. Then he was with the CIA for 27 years, and I went into through graduate school and then into journalism. And I would say during the 27 years he was in the CIA, I spent a disproportionate amount of my time trying to expose what the CIA was up to, what they were doing, and holding them accountable for overthrowing governments and killing people and so forth. So we come at this from different life experience, but we've hooked up here trying to make sense of this world that we're living, and hopefully we'll stick around for a while, or maybe departing from. But that's it. And today I want to talk about what's going on with this so-called was a peace agreement or a ceasefire agreement with Israel and Gaza, and now it's just kind of descended into ultimate madness, ramping up the genocide and what have you. And I don't know, it's such an appalling situation. But I want to start with a provocative question, and that is, where does it fit into the grand scheme of what Trump is all about and where America is headed, and indeed where the world is headed? Because on one hand, you have Trump talking about peace with Russia, and maybe even with China, and ending the war in Ukraine, and there's negotiations going on. On the other hand, we have an intensification of this horror in Israel and Gaza, no talk at all about peace, unleashing Bibi Netanyahu to do his worst, killing children, killing innocents, and so forth. And I'm trying to get these things together and just begin with one little odd historical thing. Recently, the United States sided with Russia, Putin's Russia, in resisting a UN Security Council resolution on the Ukraine war and presenting a more pro-Russian position. And Netanyahu's Israel joined Russia and the U.S. in that view, and were backed by it. And so I'm wondering, in this new world order that Trump is bringing about, and in the one that the China and Russia have been talking about, multipolar world, where all these different countries, what happens to people who don't have a country? What happens to people from a country that doesn't have nuclear weapons, that doesn't have a lot of power? And that's the situation of the Palestinians. And a situation is evolving where, yeah, there might be peace over Ukraine, and there might be a new understanding between the United States and Russia, and maybe even with China, and that's all bodes well for the world. On the other hand, people struggling for their freedom who don't have it, and in fact have had it denied for them for all these, almost going on a whole century now, or certainly 7 decades, the Palestinian people, uh, they're going to be betrayed. And they'll even be betrayed by Arab governments and people who have professed a concern about them. And in fact, even China and Russia have expressed support for the Palestinians. Is that all going to be abandoned in this new great power arrangement? So I want to throw that out to you and take it where you want.
Well, Bob, you'll recall that our last conversation focused on me uh, trying to explicate the implications of Trump thinking that he was saved by God. He was saved by God. He said so. I think he may even believe it. Saved by God to do what? To wage genocide? Well, that's not my kind of God, okay? What he's done now is blessed or supplied, given 2,000 pound bombs to a person who's renewed the genocide just this morning, killing over 400 Palestinians as they slept or as they tried to make do in their tents and so forth. Uh, this is beyond the pale in terms of our being Americans and our tolerating our our citizenship without protesting really, really loud against this genocide. Now, just to give you a little context here, uh, when you told me you'd like to talk about this just 5 minutes ago, I went back and I said, on October 7th, one of my very close family members, a young woman who cares about these things, cares to 3 kids, but she still cares to keep up. She said, "Hey, Dad, here's the question. Can you give me a brief synopsis of what's happening in Israel?" Oh, brief synopsis, okay. Well, it took me 3 pages in this essay that I did for my own website. But I talked about the religious justification, this business about the Zionist Jews, like the ones in power in Israel now, eschatological Jews, the end days, willing to risk the end days, not only for themselves, but for all of us, because they think they're entitled to do that. And is Trump one of them? Deuteronomy, they say. This is why we treat the Arabs. They say that what is it? Deuteronomy 15:4 says, "You shall have, you shall have this land of milk and honey." And the second part of that says, "So long as there are no poor among you." It doesn't say only you. It doesn't say the people you would displace in 1948, 750,000 Palestinians. It doesn't say that, okay? It says, so there will be no poor among you. So, sort of a deal, okay? So it's like, you could call it a covenant. You shall have this land, live in it prosperously, but as long as there is no poor among you. So it was an only if sort of thing, okay? Then in 1967, uh, the Israelis decided, well, they could easily expand their borders. And as most people know, they expanded well beyond now, what is now Israel, what Israel proper was. And they got the West Bank, they got Gaza, they got part of Syria. And, one people said, well, they were being attacked uh, by the Arabs. I mean, the Egyptians were trying to attack them. Well, not really. Now, it's easy for you to say, McGovern. What do you mean, not really? Well, Prime Minister Menachem Begin said in Washington, what the date? August 8th, 1982. It was the New York Times. Look it up. So what he said, quote, in June 1967, we had a choice. The Egyptian army concentrations on the Sinai approaches did not prove that Nasser was really about to attack us. We must be honest with ourselves. We decided to attack him. Period. End quote. Whoa! So that whole 1967 war was sort of a war for Lebensraum, what the Germans call more living space. Okay. So what happened? Well, that was June. In November of that same year, 1967, the Security Council of the United Nations unanimously condemned Israel and said you have to return from the occupied territories. Okay, did they do that? Well, give them a break. It was only 1967. How many years since then? No, they haven't returned. Matter of fact, more recently, they've occupied parts of Syria that they have no business occupying, but they just do it. Now, what else? Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention 1967. It was a big year. There was that war, 6 day war. It was really a 5 day war, but they uh, they want to say 6 Day War because it has to do with the Sabbath. What happened? Well, there was a U.S. intelligence ship right off Gaza, okay? And it was collecting signals intelligence about what the Israelis were doing in this war that was by then 3 days old. The date was June 8th. And what happened? Well, the Israelis sent aircraft around to inspect the USS Liberty. It was in international waters. And then later they sent fighter bombers to sink it, okay? And then two patrol boats to torpedo it. What were they trying to do? They were trying to sink it and blame it on the Egyptians to get us even more involved in the Mid East, okay? So what happened? Well, President Johnson and his Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, covered it up. So 32 American sailors, no, 34 American sailors were killed. 170 plus sailors were injured. Most of the crew were casualties, but LBJ, McNamara, and to their discredit, the head of the Army, I'm sorry, the head of the Navy covered it up. So what they give it the Israelis to believe? Now, listen, this is real easy, okay? Uh, this gave the Israelis to believe uh, that they could get away with murder. They could get away with murdering U.S. citizens, and there would be no consequences. Were there consequences? No. The Navy was ordered to cover it up, and it did. And I know several of the USS Liberty survivors are friends of mine. You want to hear? You want to hear what shell shock at the old days, what do they call it now, PTSD is? Talk to them. So there's one thing. Now, I won't go on forever, but that was 67. Later, when the Israelis imposed this blockade on Gaza, there was another American citizen killed on the Marvi Marmara, a Turkish ship, which the Israelis riddled with bullets. This was 2010, and one American was killed. You know, nothing said about that. Now, this is sort of interesting because it's a personal experience, Bob. I was part of this U.S. boat to Gaza. These very, very justice oriented, courageous, and imaginative women bought a boat, registered it in the U.S. It was U.S. charter, okay, U.S. under U.S. auspices. We've outfitted it. We all chipped in. It's not money. And we decided to sail to bring letters and other things to Gaza. And we were ready to do that in 2011 at the end of June. What happened? Well, I get this notice at the end of June. I just did this thing out and I even wrote about it. I said, look, I've been told by a friend with real good contacts in the National Security Council of the United States um, that the White House does not plan to do anything to protect you if the same thing happens to you at the hands of the Israelis as what happened to that Turkish ship, the Mavi Marmara. As a matter of fact, I'm reliably told, said this source, that they would be perfectly willing, quote, to have cold corpses of activists shown on American TV, end quote. Now, that was just one source, okay? But it was pretty plugged in. So I went with it and I wrote about it. Craig Murray, ambassador, former UK ambassador, saw this. He's a friend of mine. And what he wrote, he says, I know Ray to be an honest man, but I thought it would be possible that his source was exaggerating. And therefore, I set my own diplomatic sources to work in Washington without giving them any indication of what Ray said. They came back with an independent report from a different source close to Hillary Clinton, and they said actually same the thing that they told Ray with the warning they gave Ray. I was told that Obama will welcome an Israeli attack on this U.S. ship as giving him a chance to confirm his pro-Israeli credentials and improve his standing with AIPAC ahead of the presidential election race. That fatalities would, quote, not be a problem, end quote. Well, do I feel strongly about this? Yeah, I do. I probably should tell people that in the event, uh, the the uh, the people in Greece, where we were docked, uh, posed all kinds of impediments to our departure. The most ridiculous one was that they saw a defect in our air conditioning system. You know, anyhow, uh, we decided to go out there anyway, and we made it all the way 9 nautical miles out of port from Piraeus, outside of Athens, and the Greek Coast Guard very apologetically said, "You can't go any farther. We're under orders." Okay. Then they threatened to board us, so we had to turn back. And then we learned that Obama had leaned all over the Greeks. He said, "Look, you need a lot of support from the IMF for those new loans you need. If you let those guys get out into the high seas, we're going to look very, very closely at all that." So Obama was responsible for us not getting out of port, and maybe for me still being alive today. But that's the kind of personal experience that kind of gives you an idea of how cheap life is when the Israelis are pursuing political agendas.
Well, let me throw in my own personal connection. I happen to uh, cover the Six Day War for Ramparts magazine, where I was an editor, and actually got into the West Bank and Gaza after at the immediate no, the aftermath of the war, and it was a different Israel than Netanyahu's Israel. It was an Israel governed by the Labor Party, and even on the top ranks of people who, like Moshe Dayan, who was the hero general here, and Alon, who was leading political figure, they were at great pains to tell me, given that I was coming from a more leftist publication in the United States, and everyone else I talked to said, if we occupy these people, these millions of people we've now come into control of, because it wasn't just the land. The old original Israeli slogan, Zionist slogan, was "A land with no people for a people with no land." The Jewish people didn't have a land. There were no people living. Well, there were lots of people living there, and by then the Israelis knew this. By the time of the Six Day War, because they had plenty of them living in Israel proper, and they suddenly had these millions of people, and a comparable population actually to their own when you put the two together. And then the question is, what happens to those people? And those people, the original Israelis that I talked to in the leadership of the Labor Party, said we cannot occupy these people forever. Something has to be worked out. And Isaac Rabin, the leader of Israel, did take the steps to try to recognize a Palestinian state and live side by side. He was killed for his efforts by a Jewish fanatic, and that his widow has actually pointed out she held Netanyahu and his party, a movement, responsible for stoking the flames of hatred towards her husband, who had also been an Israeli military person and a hero of considerable respect. So, we're now in this situation where here is Donald Trump, who, full disclosure, I also have a German father, but I had a Jewish mother, give me a different perspective on things. But Donald Trump, who careful accepts enthusiastically the idea that the major attack to Jewish people in this world has come somehow from the Palestinians, who actually were not involved as militarily in the Six Day War. Israel got along quite well with Egypt after that war. They got along with Jordan after that war. They were involved in the hostilities that were emerging. And yet the Palestinians were held responsible. They didn't have an army, they didn't have weapons, and so forth. So we're in a situation now where you made a joke at the beginning. Will my work be threatened? Will I be threatened? Well, our Justice Department, as it's called, under Donald Trump, is now has units going out to investigate universities, investigate life, and anybody who dares criticize Netanyahu's Israel, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, whether they have a lifetime of concern about Jewish people, which I would claim I do. And my mother, my Jewish mother, we lost our whole family in Lithuania I went there after the war, couldn't find any remnants of it, remembrance. Yet now, if you dare criticize Netanyahu, your security in America will be threatened. Even if you're a judge somewhere and you rule that people have a right to demonstrate and criticize Israel. So I want to focus on that a bit. Uh, and you're somebody who was paid by the taxpayers to analyze. You were an analyst in the CIA. I have to always point out you were not one of the killer squad or the torture squad. You were an analyst, an intellectual. How do you explain what is going on now, and what where is there's not much of a there is something of a peace movement. A lot of Jewish people are in that movement, Jewish Voice for Peace and so forth. But you know, even the establishment, or I shouldn't say even particularly the establishment, is afraid to take on this issue. And of course, Biden and the Democrats were very supportive of Netanyahu and did not in any serious way criticize him. So give us your an analysis of where we are. Are the Palestinians the easy target, the expendable to be eliminated, which is, after all, what Hitler thought he could do with the Jews, right? And succeeded, unfortunately, in destroying 6 million Jewish people, that he could get away with it because the rest of the world wouldn't care. So here you have Trump, getting back to my original point, apparently willing to make peace with Russia, maybe get along with China, these powerful countries that have big armaments. And so, but comes to Palestinian people, he's going to kill every one of them. He's actually made that threat. They're people who claim to be speaking in the name of Hamas don't conform, and now it was Israel that broke the negotiation. It was not Hamas, but now he says, well, then they'll all have to die. This is a surreal but terrifying moment, isn't it, for those care about human rights?
I agree, Bob, and especially with respect to Columbia University, Khalil, and the 400 million that Columbia is taken away from Columbia, that the U.S. is taken away from Columbia if it doesn't behave and fulfill a list of conditions that won't quit. Our civil liberties are in great peril. Now, it's an anomaly that I really don't understand the way I'd like to understand things, but it is a fact of life that the Israel lobby has inordinate influence, not only in our government, but in our media. And media is key. Now, when Jewish Voices for Peace demonstrate in Grand Central Station or elsewhere in New York City,
Well, they did it at Trump Tower too, just
that's
recently.
right, yeah, and what, 200 got arrested? I know those people. I always can single out 3 or 4 or 5 faces that I've stayed at their houses or that we did various justice actions together. They are very sincere, very courageous people. They're the kind of people that bought the U.S. boat to Gaza, equipped it, and then manned it with 50 people, including people like Alice Walker, a New York Times correspondent also. I mean, maybe that's why we escaped what befell the Turkish ship. There was no Alice Walker or the New York Times reporter on that ship. But I just I know what the situation is. I know the power that the inordinately great influence of the Jewish lobby on the media is.
Well,
Now, to
don't
explain
call
it,
it the. I don't like to call. I don't want to call it the Jewish lobby, because it's actually a disproportionate number of the people who object to what is being done in the murder of the Palestinian children and women are Jewish. In any demonstration, I've seen it on college campus, I've seen anywhere, there's a very large number, much more, larger than their percentage in of the regular population, of Jewish people protesting. So I think, it's people who believe in that. It's ironic. We have a Jewish, in fact, in Ukraine, you're right. The person that Israel betrayed by supporting with Russia is Jewish, right? Zelensky. You know, in Mexico, someone who has actually spoken out on these things is Jewish, right? Scheinbaum. So we actually have two leaders of countries that are Jewish right now at this moment. That doesn't stop the Zionist lobby. Anybody who does something different or shows how Jews can be involved in issues in a more universal way, like caring about what happens to the people of Mexico or Ukraine, that's not their cup of tea. It's
No,
this
you
whole
you
thing
make
is
a good point.
centers,
Yeah.
huh?
No, you make a good point, Bob. There is a big distinction between Jewish and Zionist. Okay, let's say Zionist. I misspoke, but I already talked about my very courageous Jewish friends in Jewish Voice for Peace and elsewhere. Yeah, it's the Zionist influence, and of course, the Zionist project is a political one, and it has from its outset the notion that Jewish are the Israelis or the Jews are entitled to a special blessing or dispensation from God. And when Trump says, "Yeah, that's why God saved me," to do what? To encourage genocide against the Palestinians? I don't think so. And so what we need to do is have some hope here. Now, when 30, 40 years ago, 40 years ago, let's say, I had no hope that when democracy came to South Africa, it would come peacefully. No hope at all. Now, de Klerk came in and he was enlightened and he said, we don't want a bloodbath here. And he acquiesced in majority rule. Uh, Mandela came out of prison. There was a peaceful settlement. Yeah, they still have lots of problems, but apartheid was gone. Okay, so there's that possibility that could conceivably work out for the Middle East. But in those days, the U.S. Was kind of wishy-washy. They didn't really support one side or the other. This time they do. Okay, and what I'm saying is the Zionists, many of which are at top positions in our government. Okay. I mean, it's not a coincidental that they occupy many of our cabinet posts and many of our editors of prominent newspapers. It happens to be, call them Zionists if you want. But yeah, there they are. So this inordinate influence is something that really from the very start of our nation, George Washington warned about. He said, you know, uh, it's foolish to identify yourself with the interests of another nation, yeah, when the other nation doesn't share your exact goals or interests. And so do other people, other prominent statesmen. So what we need to do is step back and say to Trump, look, whatever you're doing in Ukraine that might result in peace, what you're doing in Gaza, mass starvation. Only the Houthis are attacking now. Now, only the Houthis, I think it will be more. I mean, the Houthis are giving what I think is an edifiable example because they don't want people to be starved to death. Okay, and they said as long as you have peace there and feed the people, we won't block the Red Sea. I think that there's a possibility that some Arab nations will have cojones finally and say, look, this is really not only unjust, but if we don't do something about it, our own Palestinian populations are going to rise up and throw us out. So we'll have to wait over the next months, I suppose. But within the interim, we have maybe probably half Palestinian people, women, children, all people killed, exterminated, just like the Jews were during Hitler, and we support that. They couldn't do it without us. If I was going to say Biden, for God's sake, if Trump got on the phone and said, Netanyahu, knock it off. I'm sending my enforcer, Steve Witkoff, and he's going to tell you why, but knock it off. It's a little too embarrassing for the
No,
United
he didn't
States
do
of
that.
America.
Let's just wrap this up. He was warned. He was told in advance this was happening, and it was endorsed. And we're gonna wrap this up now. We promised to keep these things down to a half hour, but it is a horribly sobering experience. And I'll return to my original point. It's quite possible for the great powers the people who have armies, who have nuclear weapons, who have resources, to get along and divide up the world. Maybe that's what will happen now. But if you got the people who are the outsiders, who have been marginalized, who have been oppressed, who have been, in effect, imprisoned, as was the case of the Palestinians, they're going to be left out of the grand bargain. They're going to be screwed, and they're going to be murdered, and they're going to be eliminated. And you know what? As to what happened with the Jews, most of the world looked away. I know. I'm older than you, Ray. I was alive when this was happening. I was a kid, but I was alive, and I followed it. And most of the world studiously ignored it, did not let it intrude. And that's what's happening now. Most of the world will go along with the elimination of Palestinians. But we're going to wrap this up for this
Bob,
week.
I have to intercede here and just say that you're quite right, and what you say is exactly right as a reporter. Okay, I've been called lots of things. Most recently, an activist. So what I'm saying here is that it's up to us. It's up to us U.S. citizens to act not with the sheepish submissiveness that Germans acted in 1933, 34, 35. Okay, it's up to us to act. And the Jewish Voices for Peace shows us the way. BDS is another way. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Those are movements that were used successfully against South African, the white South African government.
Yeah.
We could use them again. Like we shouldn't have to just depend on the Houthis to do our
I
business
think
for
we need to
justice.
speak out. But, Ray, I just want, I'm sorry you put it in a way that bothers me. The Germans went along because at the end of the day, they embraced Hitler. They embraced genocide. This is something I've had to recognize with the part of my family that were German and not Jewish. I think Donald Trump should have to reckon with that in his own family, where they were all German and all, in some sense, complicit. And the fact of the matter is, it was convenient to go along. It fed into chauvinistic ideology. It fed into, and one of the great ironies here is once again the Jews are being used because, after all, the justification for supporting them on the part of right wing Christians in America is this will bring on the Armageddon, and the only people who will rise to heaven will be Christians and not Jewish. And it goes back to if you want to talk about anti Semitism, once again, the Jews are dragged in to justify anti Semitism. That's what's happening because this attack on Jewish Voice for Peace, this attack on any, God, here's Trump even says that the leading Jewish senators, and some of whom, like Schumer, have so been blindly loyal to Israel, he now challenges whether they're Jewish. I mean, it's the most bizarre situation here. That it's you know what it is? I mean, that's what it was, the big lie. That's what Hitler was about. The big lie. You avoid your real problems. You avoid all your other your ambitions, your greed, and everything else, and you blame it on the most vulnerable. Then it was the Jews. Now it's the Palestinians and those who dare speak out for their rights. I'm going to
Bob,
wrap this up. Or we, knowing you and
you're
me,
right, Bob. You're right, except for one thing. The Germans were afraid. Okay, but what I'm saying to
the
whoever's
Germans were
listening,
what?
afraid. They were
Some.
terrorized. They had the majority when Hitler came in, and their political leaders
Yeah.
folded. What I'm saying is, don't be afraid, America. This is our chance to stand up before it's too late.
Okay, well put. I'll give you that. I want to thank. Okay, I want to thank you, Ray. We'll be back next week with another edition, and I want to thank Joshua Shear, our executive producer, Diego Ramos, who writes the introduction, Max Jones, who does the video, and the JKW Foundation, and in memory of Gene Stein, a fiercely independent writer who did speak out for the rights of Palestinians as well as other marginalized, exploited people, and in Integrity Media in Chicago, which gives us some support, and a terrific lawyer, Principal Len Goodman, for helping us out here. And see you next Tuesday with another edition here for Sheer Post. Okay, Ray, take care and
Thanks,
be
Bob.
with you.